So the first thing we need to do, assuming that you already have USMF or any other company that you want to work with, I've already made something available. I call it Pelican Coast, for example, right? And assuming that this has already been configured as part of a finance, we do have basically this company. So no matter what type of implementation and vertical industry you're going to be a functional consultant for, you're working in a team. And we're going to talk about how do we go about implementing distribution and trade in this course. But finance always comes first. That means the finance functional team have already done the discovery, proof of concept, all of those things, and implemented the system in a proper way, perhaps did the migration, brought a bunch of data like customers, vendors, chart of accounts, etc. Now, everything is about dollar and cents in a business, so therefore finance has to be implemented first. Now, what we are focusing on, we are assuming that we are going to prepare a company that has already gone towards finance implementation, successfully tested it. You are supposed to continue and implement the distribution and trade, which is as part of supply chain. When we say supply chain, we're talking about from the moment you buy raw materials, by the time you perhaps manufacture it or package it or do nothing, just simply distribute it and sell it, the whole chain of events, including inventory management, warehouse management, expense management, cost accounting, transportation management, you name it, that is required as part of the business. All of these modules are literally as part of the supply chain. Now, once we are at it, first is mandatory, in my opinion, to spend a few minutes talking about the high level of all of these modules, and you at least get an expectation. What is it that we're going to cover in this course, and what is it that we don't? Yeah. First of all, general ledger and accounts receivable and payable, as well as the budgeting, cash and bank management, consolidation, credit and collection, as well as the fixed asset, they're all part of finance training. So if perhaps in the future you're interested in order to learn the finance, become a functional consultant in that, you need to take the finance series. However, expense management is about travel and expenses. We're going to talk a bit about cost accounting and cost management as part of our training. Like, for example, we assume that we are basically getting raw materials and we create a final good out of it. We are not teaching you production, which is actually a very powerful module of Dynamics which controls and allows you to manage discrete, which require a BOM or bill of material, as well as the process, which requires formula, or lean manufacturing. We don't talk about that, but we are going to discuss how to create something and mimic the discrete manufacturing very shortly as part of our training. So at least you get acquainted a bit about bill of material, how it will work. Another topic is about procurement and sourcing. We're going to discuss that. It's about purchasing module. We will discuss literally organization administration a bit in regard to some of the policies that you may want to incur. I'd like to basically talk about the purposes a bit. Procurement internal control is the only one that we're going to discuss in our training. As part of this, you can actually associate a policy to say from what vendor, preferred or approved vendor you can buy, what catalog. I'm going to show you that a bit. And then obviously, as far as the rest of it, such as, for example, fleet management is usually a mini, I would say, module that is fully functional for reservation, for car rentals, but usually we use this module as a building block for development training. So ISVs or even your company can create additional modules if you like. HR, payroll will not be discussed as part of our training. We do not talk about master planning in detail. I show it to you very briefly in regard to what it does, but that requires additional training for you. We don't discuss advanced warehouse management. We don't discuss transportation management either. These are part of different training. Time and attendance also will not be discussed. Tax has already been taken care of as part of our finance. And we do talk about sales and marketing, obviously, as part of our training. We talk about product information management, which defines the product. And basically, as far as the service management is about repair and diagnostic, which requires a project accounting. None of those will be discussed as part of our training. So overall, no matter what you do, basically every single activity may require to be recorded as far as like financial cost, the purchase price, sales price, etc., and the cost that you're holding it within an inventory. There are other modules such as retail. You have to take the retail training courses, vendor collaboration. I speak about it a bit in regard to how to enable that for the vendor to take a look at the purchase orders or perhaps invoices that I've sent, what's the status on it. We'll discuss that a bit. We cover inventory management as well. That would be it pretty much. So that was a quick overview. Let's think about the concept of supply chain first. I use the old-fashioned way, and I use the graphical representation for you. Now, assume that this is your company, yeah, this circle. You are either buying some from a vendor of yours, or you're selling some to a customer of yours. Now, regardless of what you do, finance is always holding the amount, $sign or euro or whatever, wherever you're coming from. That would be the currency of your choice. Needless to say, we have lots of discussion in regard to the finance rate there. But in typical scenario, when you are issuing a document, which we know it as a purchase order, to a vendor will basically prepare the goods and delivers it to you. Therefore, there would be an environment that you have to get the goods. We know this as a warehouse. And warehouse is actual representation of a physical location. Some of the warehouses maybe indeed relates to a specific operation, such as only relates to shipping or receiving. Therefore, a company may have multiple warehouses, like for production, maybe for different type of scenario like packaging, maybe quarantining, etc. Now, having said that, the collection of all these warehouses are going to be located and grouped in a site. So the definition is that the site is a logical grouping of warehouses. What does that mean? That means you could have a site, for example, called production, but one warehouse could be indeed named alphanumerical, like by city. Like your, let's say, receiving goods is in Los Angeles, and then maybe you have to ship it somewhere else, maybe in Chicago, to do certain activities on it and bring it back somewhere else and then send it out as a sales order. As far as other aspects in regard to the customer, obviously you are generating a sales order, but this sales order could be indeed after the customer sends you their PO. And then we're going to talk about literally how do we deal with this invoicing. What do we do when it comes to a warehouse? We are talking about the breakdown of the warehouse today, like inbound, and then you may want to bring it in another location, and then from there to another location for so many different reasons. Like, for example, you want to unpack the pallet, you want to probably break it up, put the goods in different zones, etc. So we're going to talk about those. So the first thing you need to think about, I'm not going to elaborate a lot more, is literally a site. But as an overview of the entire operation, there are so many check and balances may happen, like quality control, or we know it as QC, or quality assurance probably. So when the good comes, maybe you want to actually have the system to trigger it, or maybe you want to move it around, you want to have that to be triggered, to check to see if something has been damaged, or maybe when you process something manufactured, maybe you want to have a quality control to verify, to see if it's going to satisfy the requirements of the customer before you do anything. So we're going to talk about that. Sometimes you want to deliver a quantity, and this quantity that they want, you may want to basically send more or less. We call it over or under delivery. We're going to discuss those things. Lots of stuff. Let's get it started. As I mentioned, the first thing we need to do, we need to take care of the sites. But since you're new to the system, you can simply use a fantastic capability of the system using the binocular, call it search. And you heard sites, right? So if I type in sites, system automatically is going to populate a list of available menu items that have a word site in it. And nicely you can find out where that is. So since we talked about inventory, we can simply just click here, or we could have gone to inventory management and go to the inventory setup, and on the breakdown, find the site. You see, if you're new, it's a bit difficult, but if you hear something, you can simply search for it, yeah? as an alternative, if you are using a very complex menu item names, such as, for example, let's say legal entity, you can type in L and space E. As you see, it shows any letter that starts with L, and basically the second word is going to start with E. So you can simply find things around and not to be worried about that specific area. So simply you see the asterisk, you can click on it, and that becomes a favorite, and when you're done with it, you can get rid of it very nicely. Now, as part of my demonstration, like I said, I don't use any PowerPoint or anything. It's better to just see the system and tell the story. And as I tell the story, literally you understand how the real implementation is going to be done. So here's the story. Assuming this company of mine, Sears Retailers, is going to literally have 2 sites at least. Why? I create the first site to identify exactly what is this site is all about. Like, for example, I call it 1. If you already have site 1 in your demo data, such as USMF, you can name it anything you want. As a matter of fact, that's alphanumerical. You can call it S1, for example. I just call it 1, and I call it main warehouse. Now, this main warehouse is going to get all the raw materials that I need to buy, or I may want to buy it from my sister company. We're going to talk about intercompany a little bit later. And then, for now, there are so many other areas in which we don't necessarily discuss it in detail at this moment, but we rather talk about things as they come along. The first thing you need to consider is a time zone. By default, a company has a time zone on its own. And pretty much if I right-click here and duplicate my tab, that is a good scenario not to lose where you were, and you can still navigate using the same session. In order to go and find out exactly what do we mean by what I said in regard to having a legal entity and a time zone. As you see, this shows all the legal entities that are available in my environment. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned that this is a Pacific time zone, but when I create the site, is usually using the GMT time zone. Now, when to change this, you see, I'm teaching you, and at the same time, I'm telling you the best practices when it comes to implementation. Depending on multi-site capabilities of the system, if you want to do a scheduling for master planning perhaps, or delivery or whatnot, if you have multiple sites and multiple time zones, and your schedule has to be accordingly to those time zones, we recommend to keep it as GMT, and automatically system schedules it based on a local time zone. But if it's specific to a customer, and they have, let's say, United States in a mainland, we have 5 time zones, let's say, Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, and also Hawaiian time. So assuming one of the last implementation I just finished, the company wanted to basically make sure that Hawaii would be the basis. Why? Because they wanted to get the customers as long as they want. Because Eastern time, let's say 5 p.m. of theirs, is going to be around, like, let's say 2 p.m. in California, and maybe let's say 11 a.m. or 9 or 10 a.m. in Hawaii. So they just want to make sure that they can actually address that. So this time zone is extremely important when you think of it. If the customer is really wanted to make sure that all of their scheduling and perhaps majority of their planning is going to be universal, and they don't want to be related to any specific time zone, they don't want to lock it, they want to have a global based on, I would say, centralized scheduling, yeah, keep it as a GMT. But sometimes they want to make sure that the last call center or the last company that takes a call, they rely on that specific one. Like main warehouse, let's say, is always coming to California, let's say, from parcel. So I have to make sure the raw materials is based on that time zone. So it really depends. Because of that, you have order entry deadline group, which allows you, by the way, to show you another capability of the system in order to basically see the detail of that form without looking for it. Be careful. If you click here on inside of the Dropbox and do a right click, you see a shortcut or context menu of the browser. But if you click on the down arrow, right click at it, you can go to the view details, and that will automatically open up the form for you. So down arrow, right click, don't forget. So what does this do? This is actually order entry deadline group. So let's talk about that further. If I actually go back here and let's put in order deadline entry, you see I type in ODE. It brings up order entry deadlines as part of a distribution, and simply you can say what time on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for what site or what group is the last time that you take order. That's all I wanted to show you. We're not going to restrict it, but you have lots of capabilities. Another thing I need to tell you, this warehouse section has nothing to do with the warehouse we're talking about. This is in regard to a module. We know it as Advanced Warehouse Management, which we don't discuss it as part of our training. As part of Advanced Warehouse Management, you get additional dimensions, which we get into it, and you can actually, instead of having quarantine warehouse, which is just like a put-aside area that nobody should sell or move it until the quality control has been run on it, unlike that, you can actually have a different status. And that is a huge enhancement in the system. And as a matter of fact, when you use Advanced Warehouse Management, which I'm going to show it to you shortly, you won't be able to get rid of inventory status and license plate, and location will be changed. So we're going to talk about that. So let's say I have a main warehouse. I'm going to create another one. It's going to be a bit quicker. So I create the second site and I call it production. So in my example, what I'm trying to mimic here for you, improvising it for you, in other words, I bring the goods into one site, then I have to move it to another site and produce it there, and perhaps sell it from there, or maybe create the third site and move it there and sell it from there. I'm going to save this, and of course everything is auto-save, but in order to be sure, sometimes some forms don't save automatically. So you're always safe to click save, or you can press Ctrl S. The next step is to go through the warehouse. And as part of the warehouses, I'm actually showing you so many different real-life scenarios that helps you understand the system better and its functionality. Now, I click New, and I create my first warehouse, which happens to be Warehouse 11, let's say. And I call it Main Warehouse again, okay? That would be the main site. This is the main warehouse. I associate it with the site number 1. I call this site number 1 Main Warehouse. I made a mistake. How could I change it? No problem. You go back here, and as you see, even though you made the site, you can change it, and I call it main site. And this would be production site. You can change the description, but you won't be able to change the ID. Keep that in mind. So now I'm going to go back and select the main site. And as you see, there are 3 types of warehouses in typical inventory, which is a simple warehousing. We have a default warehouse, which literally allows you to bring goods in and move it around, do whatever you want with it. That's the default warehouse. However, if it is a quarantine warehouse, no longer you can associate that with either a quarantine or a transit warehouse. From the name indicates, quarantine warehouse is a warehouse that you put the goods aside, and at the time that is inside of the quarantine warehouse, you won't be able to do anything with it unless you either release it from the quarantine back to where it was, or run some quality check against it, do some rework maybe if you're a manufacturer, etc. And then you have a transit, which literally, similar to the quarantine, you won't be able to associate that with the quarantine or transit warehouse. It just would be a logical warehouse, I would say, like a truck, like an airplane, like a parcel, which you would like to know how much goods is in the transit. So to begin with, let's go with the default. And default could have a quarantine and transit warehouse associated with it. And needless to say, you could default a vendor account to this warehouse. This is a magnificent field here that unfortunately is not being talked a lot about it. I just like to open it up because my sessions usually are based on real life scenarios and examples. So it makes you good and ready for the real life implementation. One of the benefits of this vendor account is that whenever you choose the warehouse, typically the vendor will be suggested to you. Later we talk about master planning. We do discuss a bit about inventory, receipt location and all when I talk about the location name, but this belongs usually to Advanced Warehouse Management. And what do we mean by Advanced Warehouse Management? Here you have a warehouse. All you need to do is select this checkbox to make it Advanced Warehouse Managed. If it is not, then you're not being capable of dealing with this specific module, which is not part of your training at this stage, okay? So we're not going to use that as part of our training. We are not going to use the retail either. You have to take the retail course, so we are not going to discuss that either. But as far as the location name, you may want to have a typical location, such as aisle, rack, shelf, and bin. So let's actually turn them on. But prior to that, let's take a look at something else. That leads to another conversation that is required for setting up the basis for distribution and trade. If you go under Product Information Management and expand the dimensions and variant groups, you notice that there are three groups. We like to talk about the storage dimension group right now because it relates to site and warehouse. What does it mean? Any company that has a product has to let the system know where that product is. So a storage dimension is all about, okay, where do you put the product? Like it's a site and a warehouse. For example, if I create my own, by default, I call it, for example, delete me because I'm not going to use it. You see, nothing will appear, and when I even tab it, nothing will work. If I refresh it, then you can actually see dimensions will be appeared here. So autosave or refresh will take care of the business. Now, as you notice, you got a site and a warehouse by default. You can't live without. So you must have a site and a warehouse, and you cannot have a warehouse without a site. And having a site alone with no warehouse does not mean anything. The location is a shared dimension. What do we have? A warehouse. Warehouse is necessary for distribution and trade. I'm sure you have gone to the grocery store, department store. Any of those places are a warehouse. You have to know where the item is in order to be able to pick it, perhaps pack it, or maybe just put it on your shopping cart, take it to the cash register, or in a business, B2B business, when somebody places an order online or over the phone, you need to basically say, okay, what is the item? And then sell it. And then literally how it works behind the scene is going to create inventory transaction to say, okay, where is that item? So therefore, the warehouse is going to be a part of a site to tell you exactly where that item is. And you could just simply say warehouse number 11 or warehouse like LA, whatever. You can name it anything you want. Or alternatively, you could even be more specific and say which location, which consists of an aisle, a rack, a shelf, or a bin, or any of the combination. If you go to any grocery store, you have seen those aisles that they have a number or name, right? Within each aisle, you have a bunch of racks. And within each rack, you have a bunch of shelves. And graphically, it looks like this, right? So literally, within each shelf, you may have a placeholder for putting some goodies in it. Like, for example, if you go to Home Depot or any other places, they may have a bucket that you can actually pick things up. Or grocery store, you have literally an apple area. I mean, what do? There's an area, you pick up apples. So you may buy it by ton, you may buy it by kilos, you may buy it by pound, but you may want to sell it by each, or you may want to sell it by pack. So that's the reason that you need to have a warehouse in order to control where items are. Let's assume I have one site, and I call this site the beginning of my name. And I could have so many of you acting as my warehouse, which may be located in so many different countries. That's logical. Or I could literally have a site per functionality, like for example, production. I could have a site for distribution. I could have a site for whatever. This is logical. But what matters physically is a warehouse associated with it. The location is a breakdown of the warehouse. Like if you have a warehouse, you could say exactly where is it? Like how many aisles do I have? And within this aisle, which rack is it? Which shelf is on it? So that gives you efficiency in warehouse management. That's the whole idea. Now, having said that, this is what we were talking about, like aisle, rack, shelf, bin. So for my example, what I'm going to do, I like to make the warehouse to be also location enabled. However, before I carry on, this location is exactly like combination of any of these options. However, if this warehouse happens to be advanced warehouse managed, which I already have one here, then by default you get these two options as well. Look at this. If I make this storage dimension group to be forced by advanced warehouse management, so if I refresh it, these two items become enabled. And what are they? One of them is the inventory status, that instead of having the quarantine warehouse, if you remember, we were talking about right here, you no longer need a quarantine because literally one of these statuses could be called quarantine. You could call it damaged goods. You could call it an inspection. You could make up any status, and that's the beauty of advanced warehouse management, because prior to this, you had to create so many different warehouses for so many different reasons of quarantining. If indeed this is going to be warehouse management process, you must get the inventory status, and as a matter of fact, you cannot even take it off. License plate is a collection of bunch of plates, exactly like a license plate of your car. Imagine a truck that has bunch of stuff on it. That truck itself has its own license plate, doesn't it? So the license plate literally identifies a carrier that carries your goods with a proper number, which actually has a barcode. So you can scan it using mobile devices. You could actually control the execution of it. On top of it, the location no longer is going to be aisle, rack, shelf, or bin. But you could make a format to simulate aisle, rack, shelf, or bin, or any other format of your choice. So advanced warehousing requires advanced warehouse management. So I just wanted to show you, if I turn this off, literally inventory status and license plate should go away, and it will go away. And as a matter of fact, I can't even select them, as you see. I'm going to delete this. There's so much we're going to discuss exactly what each one of these will do. We're going to talk about it. I don't want to make the subject matter boring to tell you, oh, look at this property, that's what it does. As a matter of fact, if you point at it, you can't even read it. That's what you need to take time and read these things. But I don't teach it that way. The way I teach it is by demonstration. Like, I select this to see what's going to happen. I select this to see what's going to happen. That's how I'm going to go through. I'm going to use side on a warehouse. Here, as you notice, I'm going to enable the aisle, enable the rack. Pay attention to the location. That's just a format of how it's going to look like. If I say rack, okay, it's going to be the second segment, correct? So here is a format. Now you have to be acquainted with a couple of characters that represents two different things. First of all, if I put any constant value, it says that, where is your number? I can't even generate that. What does it mean? So you can't just put the constant value. You have to put some sort of a number on it. Then it's going to put my constant value, and it's going to take the digits off of it because of the restrictions of this. So what is each character of hash means? It means from 0 to 9. That means I can have 10 racks. If I put double, it means that I can have up to 99 racks. Now, how it's going to look like, literally, it's going to look like this. So it's going to have 02, for example. It's going to have 2 digits. If I put one more, it's going to have 3 digits, as you can tell. You can have a separator too. Like, for example, I want to have just only 1 or 2 or whatever I want. That's how it's going to look like. Would you like to have a shelf on it? How many shelves? Maybe, you know, it's like a huge supermarket or whatever. They may have up to the area that they may need a ladder, you know, like in the cereal wholesaler. But some other areas, they want to make that accessible to the customers, so they may want to have lower shelf numbers. The bin is like a, I would say, container that will be placed on a specific shelf. Like you put nails on it, let's say. Or maybe it's actually a packet that you put it in a bin and belongs to a particular customer, that you gathered so many items in it. Imagine Amazon, imagine Staples, imagine eBay. You buy so many stuff, and then they pick and choose so many different items from different areas, or in other words, locations, and they put it on that bin, ready to be packed for that customer. So I'm just going to put that in anyway. Now, this is going to be how it's going to look like. So now is location enabled, but I'm not going to make all these locations. It's going to take a very long time. I have to create aisles, which I could do it right from here. As you see, I can just do it one by one. And as soon as the form opens, I can create a brand new aisle, give it a name. But I'm not going to do that because system has a format for me to be able to deal with it. So what do? I click on a warehouse. And the reason I did that, by the way, I also like to show you a capability of an item that does use location and a capability that doesn't use the location. Like I'm using this storage dimension group that doesn't have a location, and I use this dimension group that does have a location. So at least you see the difference of manipulation of items within your warehouse. As I move forward, I make it enabled in case I have an item that requires location. So what do? I click on a location wizard. By clicking on this wizard, the process is going to get started. As you notice, this helps you to prepare certain values. The first thing you need to do as a functional consultant, when you go to a company, you have to ask for the warehouse layout. The warehouse layout is extremely important to have like some sort of a graphical representation from the customer of yours in order to mimic it in Dynamics. If you don't have it, all you need to do is visit the warehouse and see how does it look like. Another story here is the question, if all of the warehouses literally have the same layout. Maybe they don't, maybe they do. So I click next, and I actually create the following. I can run the wizard as many as times as I want, and I can basically modify this. So for warehouse number 11, which you could of course change it if you have more than one warehouse and do pretty much anything you want within this specific warehouse of yours, I'm going to create an aisle. I'm going to create inbound ducts. What does it mean? Let's go back and take a look at this again graphically to make sense out of this. Imagine the whole white area is my warehouse. When the goods come in from any place, either your sister company, vendor, incoming, customer returns, whatever, it comes to a door. We call this a bay or a door or a dock. They call this an inbound because it's incoming. And as soon as it's coming in, you're actually incrementing the quantity of that good, even if it's a customer return. Now, having said that, when it comes to the bay, you may have multiple doors, and there may be trucks coming in, it may be rail coming in, it doesn't matter. Somehow it comes in. So that would be an inbound duct, in other words. Similarly, things are supposed to get out, so therefore you may have an outbound duct. Then, depending on the layout of the warehouse, you may literally have a bunch of aisles, and in each aisle you may have a bunch of racks, and in each rack you may have a bunch of shelves, and perhaps you may have even a bin. So what do you do? Well, when the goods come in here, where do you want to place it? Is in here on the door. You may want to use a forklift or lift truck or whatever, or by hand. You need to determine where should I place this first. And then maybe somewhere else, maybe somewhere else, maybe somewhere else, maybe take it out to another warehouse of mine. That's an idea. So these are the aisles. That's A. Then you got the racks. That's right here, the red one. Then you got the shelf. Then you got the bin. Aisle, rack, shelf, bin. That alone is indeed a location. We know this as a location. So now, if you switch back here, I'm going to click Next. And as you see, by default, when I want to create an aisle, it's going to give me a special aisle. This special aisle obviously is for a special operation. For example, it could be for reservation. It could be for just like a back area. You want to put like items that you're not sure where you put it temporarily. They call it a special. And it says, how many additional aisles would you like to have? I just want to make 4 aisles. All I need to do, basically change this number to be 4. Remember about this hash. It represents 2 digits. So when I click Next, it's going to look at 2 digits. It's going to make me 4 aisles and a special. Some companies don't want to call it a special. They call it something else. That actually changes that. Some companies don't even want it. So you can actually take that out and go to the next and only have whatever you want. So for the scenario, I'm just going to keep it as a special. And I just wanted to show you that, yeah, I would like to have 2 digits here. And it's going to actually show me that I'm going to have 4 aisles. Needless to say, you can change them. Like, for example, change the name. Say these are for, let's say, I would say LCDs. Aisle number 2 usually is dedicated for maybe electronic goods. You get the picture. That's how they identify each aisle in a company, by number or by representation of a character. Like, for example, you could call it A with 1 and see how it's going to look like. You have seen some aisles like this, right? So you can call it anything you want. So these are existing ones, and as a matter of fact, if there are any already, you can view them. Anyhow, the aisles have been created. I click Next. Now it's going to ask me, how many inbound ducts do you have? How many doors do you have? These are default values, of course, that Microsoft suggests, but usually you can change it. I say I have 3 inbound doors, and as a matter of fact, it's going to have a prefix of IN underscore. It's going to look like this, and as a matter of fact, you can put a check digit. And what is a check digit? Let's talk about that. That requires me to actually go back to another area within my inventory management to link things together. If I go to the inventory parameters, you indeed have a few things that I recommend as a best practice to set up. One of them is about the default values in regard to the check digit. As you see, by default, check digit is just an algorithm to identify where a dispatcher, like a forklift driver, has a report to say this item must go where. Each specific location has a number. this number does not match this number, then you cannot place it there. Has to go to the right location. So that prevents the picker or packer not to make a mistake, to go to a wrong location. That is the whole idea. If you would like to generate this, system allows you to go by location name or two random numbers. So because of that, you can associate the check digit here, and by the time inbound door has a check digit that matches the check digit on the picking list or packing slip, then they know where they are. I'm not going to use any check digit because I rather make it simple. But you could actually make sure that the check digit is on either random number or by location name. Another thing that is required for you to understand is the concept of a unit. Well, let's go to another tab. Let's talk about units. You're selling goods, you're buying goods. Therefore, there's a piece of information that you can get. If I go to one of these modules, such as organization administration, you notice that there's a units. You already know how to find things, yeah? By default, system automatically gives you a unit as part of a demo data, a bunch of them, but if you don't have it, it's a brand new implementation. You can use the unit creation wizard, and that automatically makes most commonly used units in the world. And on top of it, you have a capability to take a look at the unit conversions that Microsoft has already given you. We will talk about intra-class and inter-class conversion later, but as you see, a standard conversion is already taken care of for you by using the wizard. Like for example, 1 centimeter is equal to 10 millimeter. Now, as you notice, when you would like to go to the units, there are different classification of the units. So let's talk about that. If I wanted to create a unit, for example, is that going to be measuring what exactly? Is that quantity? Are you going to measure length, area, liquid, time? Is that monetary for budgetary aspects? Is that manufacturing? You know, what is it exactly? System is capable to handle so many different vertical industries. For our purpose, we usually use the quantity, but you could actually use anything else in order to take care of it. However, this is important, the class. Let's assume you have a bunch of units, like for example, you're measuring quantity by each or pieces. They're all part of the same family. If that's the case, then as you notice here, when you go to the unit conversion, you have intra-class conversion, whereas inter-class conversion. As you notice, each and kilo, or bucks and pound, or bucket and pound, one of them is measuring literally quantity, the other one is measuring the weight. Therefore, we know it as inter-class. That means they're coming from two different classifications. And as a matter of fact, you could say, for this product, 1 box equals to 55 pounds. Whereas, maybe another product, like these two, both of them have each, this one weighs 1 kilo, this one weighs 1 ton. You get the picture. But intra-class is between the same classification, like pallet to each, or bag to pallet, or keg to, for example, call it pint, you know, things like that. Now, having said that, if you don't specify the default value here, then you may have some issues forgetting to put the unit. Then you have to have a unit at least for sale. In order to be able to sell it, you should have a unit for inventory, purchasing, and bill of materials. So if you basically set it up right here, get it over with, that gets defaulted anyway. Another thing that I do recommend later we come back here and we set things up is about journals and all that. We come back to this a lot. I just wanted to talk about the units at this time. Now, if I go back to the location, you have seen 3 locations so far. I go next. Now, how many outbounds do you have? Maybe I have only 2 outbounds. Okay, these are outbound. Again, you could have a check digits here and then continue. We did say we have 4 aisles. Do you recall? If I go back, which you could, you did say you did indeed have 4 aisles. You see, a special is not going to be included as part of our discussion because it's a special aisle for a special operation. So now it says, okay, which one would you like to dedicate for only picking? That means from which area, from which one of these aisles can I only pick? Check mark requires picking. Only 1 and 2. You're not supposed to pick from 3 and 4, or all of them, or 2 and 3. It's completely up to you. So here I just say, you know what? From aisle 3 to 4, for example, is only good for picking. Or maybe 2 to 3 is only good for picking. Don't use the other one. Or use all of them, 1 to 4, for example, make it available for picking. For the simplicity of my demonstration and make it a bit more nice and easy to understand, I say aisle 1 and 2 are good for picking. Now, how many racks do we have per each aisle? How many? Well, let's go with 7. Now, as you notice, it's going to tell you how many shelves each rack will have. Maybe I have only 3, so I just select 3 of them. Usually each rack at least has 1 shelf anyways. By the way, some companies, they may have a rack with no shelf at all. You know, if you're in the pipe industries, they bring a roller of aluminum or whatever metal they have, they cut it, they don't even have a shelf, they just place it somewhere on a rack. I'm bringing real life example to make sense out of this. Anyhow, long story short, how many blend? Just 1 is good for me. I click next, and here, as you notice, the additional information is going to be telling you the size of that specific location. Whatever the default here is on the inventory and warehouse management in regard to the location is going to read it from here. See what happens. To begin with, pay attention to this. Width is the first one, depth is the second, height is the third. Look at this one, height, width, depth. So if I change literally the inventory and warehouse management to say what would be my standard width, a standard depth, and a standard height in order to place some goods in it, it really doesn't care about the unit. You could consider centimeter, meter, whatever. It's just a number that you can override anyway. So here I just go with the standard width, like for example 50 over here, maybe 40 over here, and the height is about, let's say, 45. Okay? When I save this, as you notice, the location, when I go back and click next, is not going to take it, unfortunately. I wish they had a refresh button here, but I have no other choice to cancel this and do it again. So you can see it. That is good because you can review everything that we have talked about. So if I go on, I'm going to go with, let's say, 4 aisles, as I did before. Okay? I click next. Next. I have, let's say, 3 inbounds. Next. There you go. No check digits at this stage. Maybe I have only 2 outbounds. Okay, fantastic. And then I come back in here and I say, let's say 1 to 2 is going to be for picking. I'm going to have 7 or 6, let's say, racks. I have only 3 shelves on it and 1 bin. And now it's going to pick up those values, which you could override. These are the things that you need to understand. That's the typical, but you can override it. Maybe for this warehouse, maybe for picking location, not necessarily all the locations that have the same exact size. But for simplicity, we make it to be the same. But the question here is, if all these locations that will be suggested to me, they don't have the same height or width or depth, you can override them right here. Like for example, this one has 60 with a width of 70 and a height of, let's say, 75. But as you notice, it says the value of combination is not found in a related table. It just basically tries to make something new. You have to create it first and then update it later. I'm not going to change it for now. Next time you run it, you can change that. I click next. Now here it's going to talk about bulk location. What does bulk mean? That means you can bring anything in, take anything out, and as a matter of fact, I can say, you know what, from let's say 3 and 4, they are bulk location of mine. And as a matter of fact, I have only, let's say, 4. And here, I'm not going to have, let's say, more than 2 shelves. And this is actually not selected, but usually behind the scene, it is selected. If you select it, see what's going to happen. So I click next. And again, you can revisit the height, width, and depth here. Like, for example, here I'm going to change it to 50, 60, and 70. Way before it's suggested, and you're going to be fine. But if you want to change these guys, then you have to create them and then change them. I click next, and now it's going to give you a summary. I'm going to have 5 aisles, 3 inbound, 2 outbound, 36 picking location, and 16 bulk locations. And then I click finish. So now I'm good, and I'm done. So now, if I take a look at the warehouse and look at the inventory aisles, you notice that everything has been created for me. And I can actually take a look at every single one of these aisles and look at the locations for it. Now, we're going to go with the next warehouse. I'm going to create a warehouse, and I'm calling it warehouse number, let's say, 12. And this is going to be a quarantine warehouse. I'm not going to waste the time on that. I associate this with side 1, yeah? And I change this to be a quarantine warehouse. And as a matter of fact, this quarantine warehouse may also have the same exact racks, type of the same shelf, etc. So you could specify these formats here too. So I just wanted to show you that when you have this, you probably say, oh my God, I got to go through that wizard again. The answer for it is no. All you need to do is click on a warehouse and say copy location. You want to bring every location into warehouse 12. So therefore you say from warehouse 11, take it to warehouse 12. And then click OK. Everything is going to be copied over, even the text, as easy as it is. So therefore, I'm assuming that my warehouses have exact same type of a location behavior. So if I go to the aisles, as you notice, even for warehouse 12, it says 11. So you have to obviously change the text, not to confuse the customer, yeah? Because everything got copied, and these are the description. And I didn't actually change the description, which you should have changed it at the beginning, like say is LCD, electronic, apples, fruits, etc. You get the picture. And then each one of them, of course, they have their own locations too. Like if I go to the inventory location for this warehouse 12, you can see all of them too. So you got the picture as far as like how to create the quarantine warehouse. However, I like to create a new warehouse, and I call it warehouse 21, and I say it's a production warehouse. And as you notice, I like to make it the default, but associated with site 2. However, I like to choose the quarantine warehouse. As you notice, there is no quarantine warehouse. What does it teach you? It teaches you that if I would change this to site 1, you could see the quarantine warehouse related to that site. Therefore, quarantine warehouse are site specific, and they cannot be shared across multiple sites. Of course, I'm going to change this to warehouse 13 now, and I'm going to make it, for example, transit warehouse, and intentionally I call it logical. This is my terminology, yeah? What do I mean by logical? It means that literally warehouse 23, actually let's make it warehouse 23, yeah? Warehouse 23 is a transit warehouse, which is logical, and I associate it with site 2, and I make it to be a transit warehouse, no problem. And as a matter of fact, you know what, that could indeed have a location or not. So I can simply do that too, if I wanted it to, okay? Which I'm not going to right now at this stage. However, if you pay attention, when I want to create a brand new one, and I call it, for example, number 13 literally, which I call it just a warehouse, I just want to prove a concept that if I choose production site as a default, I can see the transit warehouse. However, if I choose warehouse that belongs to site 1, unlike the quarantining, still I have access to the transit warehouse for another site. That's why I call it logical. So far so good. What we have done, we have created one main warehouse which has location. I showed you how to create a quarantine warehouse, yeah? Now I go to the main warehouse and I assign my quarantine warehouse to this one. If you don't do that, then you won't be able to create the quarantine orders. So that's important. You could also associate with the transit warehouse. Why? Because you may want to send something out, so you could use that. Fantastic. And as a matter of fact, the transit warehouse belongs to site 2, yeah? So at this stage, if I go to 23, it belongs to site 2. Let's go ahead and create a regular warehouse 21, and I call it production. And I relate this to site 2. It is a default warehouse. However, as I said, there is no quarantining for that. Maybe you could make it relate to that site. But as you notice, if you want to send it back to the main, you could use the same transit warehouse. That's what they called it, what? Logical warehouse. So obviously, your production could have an aisle, rack, shelf, and bin. And beautifully, the system is capable of indeed copying all the locations from even one side to the other. Let's prove the concept. So I go to the copy location, and I say, you know what, bring it from warehouse 11 and apply it towards production. So simply, it's just going to copy everything over too. So you have that capability. But for transit, maybe I don't want to do it. Imagine I'm showing you a simple scenario. Why? Because you may not necessarily have the same exact layout. So all I do for future demonstration, for you not to get confused, I'm actually just going and placing a proper numbers here. Of course, nobody lives it like this. You should actually make it something more intuitive. So having said that, talked about the warehouses, now there's a concept in regard to replenishment. Like if something happens and you want to get something and you don't have enough of it, where is your fallback warehouse? And usually this is necessary when you literally have a line in an order that has no warehouse, where should it look for? It's good to bring this up, and this is important when you do integration and your customer or your team, development-wise, they would like to read it from a scanner or sensor and all that and bring it up. So I just associate fallback warehouse here. So don't forget units and check digit fallback warehouse. These are all three properties that so far we have talked about. Now, having said that, we pretty much covered the ideology of site, warehouses, aisles, and location. As a matter of fact, you can directly go there and see exactly which warehouse has what aisle, and right within here you can select a specific aisle and take a look at the locations right from here. And needless to say, you have even further. You can copy an aisle. You could literally go to locations directly right within here. And you could even literally deal with the locations and talk about the loads as part of advanced warehouse management. We talk about that. Take a look at the tree, the structure of how it's going to look like. Isn't it aisle, rack, shelf, bin? So that is actually a location. It says it's a picking location. So I took care of the values in regard to inventory locations and all that. However, we are not quite done with the setup. So what do we need to do now? We need to basically identify so many other stuff. We did talk about the inventory breakdown. We also have to prepare a few things prior to have a product. In regard to the inventory, the way it works, you need to have the system to be able to keep track of the cost of the item in a warehouse, because you pay rent for it, obviously, or maybe in a retailer business, the real estate of that warehouse is important. You have to place the right item in the right location, etc. We need to keep track of everything. When we buy, store, sell, or when we produce. Therefore, there's a mapping required. We know it as item groups. So consideration of the item groups logically really means that if you do have an item, within your general ledger, just for your information, this is a terminology. As a distribution and trade and functional consultant of supply chain, you should just be familiar with that and talk to functional consultant of finance. Within a GL or general ledger, we have a chart of accounts. This chart of accounts consists of a bunch of main accounts. And I'd like to show it to you very quickly. So if I actually just go ahead and type in COA, as you notice, simply show me the chart of accounts. And as a matter of fact, this is an example of Brazilian chart of accounts, Indian chart of accounts. I made one just for this course. This is what I've made. So we need to actually be able to have enough information in regard to linking series of different activities within the item group, which I like to show it to you in another tab by going through inventory management and take a look at the inventory area of the setup and click on the item groups. As you notice, for the brand new legal entity that we have created it, for distribution and trade, nothing has been created. And there are a few fast tabs, as you see.